Happy Global Running Day, everyone. I'm Barn with Generation UCAN, and we are thrilled to be joined by Dr. Mark Cucuzella for our next topic today, which is carb unloading, how to have success running on a low-carb diet. And who better to join us to talk about this topic than Dr. Mark? And Mark, you got a pretty exciting adventure coming up this weekend. Tell us what you're doing.
Yes, I'm heading to South Africa tomorrow, Varun, to do the Comrades. It's the largest and oldest ultra marathon in the world, so it won't be on World Running Day. It'll be on Sunday, June 10th, and I'll be in the air. It takes about 2 days to get there. This year's a down run. It's 90 kilometers going from Pietermaritzburg to Durban. In 2013, I did the up run, so I got to go back and do the down. I'm going with a few friends, all who are low carbers, and we'll go have some fun. Well, it'll be kind of a friendly, but it's an amazing just running and cultural experience. It is a global experience. I think there must be like 80 countries represented at this race. It's wild.
Anyone who's listening who's an ultra marathoner certainly knows it is one of the most prestigious ultras and desirable races to run. So it should be quite the special experience for you. And Mark, kind of it's a perfect bridge into what we're going to talk about today, which is, endurance training, but also as this whole low carb movement has had its second resurgence now. Really want to talk about endurance training in the context of people that are also interested in a low carb diet. And Mark, you probably have some perspective on this kind of being in the sport through the first low carb movement, but it seems like this time around, kind of as it's dovetailed with this whole conversation around sugar and overconsumption of sugar in the United States, that it's much more than just a moment this time around, and it's here to stay. Do you just have any perspective kind of on that from the first time low carb was popular in the 90s?
Yeah, so I'm a physician, and my day job is taking care of people here in West Virginia, which is the #1 obese and diabetic state in the country. I think there's a couple countries in the Middle East that have more diabetes, but that's because they've exported the American diet into Dubai is one place, and Saudi Arabia, huge diabetes and obesity. So I look at this as a perspective of how can I help the average person coming into I own a small running store, into my clinic. I direct races. So the average person now who's running actually has some metabolic illness. When I was a kid, 1980 starting to run, if you lined up at the start of any run, a 5K, 10K marathon, everyone kind of looked the same and they looked like runners. And now it's, it is what it is. So if you go to the starting line of a 5K or even a marathon, I mean, they just happen to be running, but they're not different than anyone else who's just on the sidelines, really. So we need to focus on the health of the athlete first, and performance will come later, but we need to make sure they're healthy first. And reducing sugar, as we get older is really foundational, because most of us half of the people in America now have at least pre-diabetes, and 80% don't even know it. That's even scarier. A lot of people lining up for races have this condition. I was one of them about 6 years ago.
Yeah, I'd love to get into that, Mark. You're quite the accomplished runner yourself. And, recently when we spent some time together in Boston, you were going, I believe, for the 30th consecutive year running the sub 3 hour marathon, which is just absolutely remarkable. But despite having all those great performances, even for you, there was a time where it came to, because of your health, right? You had to reevaluate the way you were fueling. So what was your sort of aha moment or your awakening where you realized I have to do something different?
Yeah, it was kind of a slow process learning it. I'm a physician, and I was studying for the Air Force at the time why people were failing fitness tests, and I noticed that the failure rates and the obesity rates were starting to kind of travel together. Where there was obesity, they had difficulty passing the test, and we didn't really learn much about nutrition in medical school. We learned the kind of standard dogma, but we thought it was true that if you ate fat, you got fat. If you were an athlete, you needed to eat a lot of carbs. And that was athletes and non-athletes. It translated to heart disease. So I started to dig in a little bit to the literature of nutrition, and I came across a couple key articles. I came across the work of Gary Taubes, Steve Phinney, Jeff Volek, and I started to rethink, how we approach this. I'd go to Air Force bases and talk about, the fitness test and nutrition. I'd always ask a question if there'd anyone lost 50 pounds and kept the weight off, and there'd be one or two hands would show up, if there was a room of 100 or so, and you'd ask what they did. And across the board, they would say something like, I got rid of sugar, I did paleo, and back then there was no paleo junk food. They'll say the A word, the Atkins word, so it was consistent that that's how they did it. Then I looked at my own lab work. I was eating sugar 2 in the morning just because I woke up and I needed it. I couldn't burn fat at all. And I was reading the literature to the people that were obese and then looking at what I was doing myself. And I was like, wow, I got this. And that was my last bowl of cereal. I was becoming insulin resistant, eating 600 grams of carbs for 30 years. I don't think the human body really has capacity to deal with that. At least mine didn't. I got away with it when I was in college, when I was in my 20s, but now I was in my mid 40s. I wasn't getting away with it. So it was an experiment. I said, well, I'll just try this. It looks like it makes sense. I shifted my cereal, bowls of it a day. I'd have shelves full of cereal, carts full of cereal, and I went and got eggs. And that was the first switch. And wow, I wasn't hungry at 10 in the morning. I had these big salads for lunch, with some type of protein and fat on them. You just go to the salad bar, there'd be some chicken or tuna salad. It was fine the rest of the day, and I would get rid of the buns, and I'd had energy, and my running didn't suffer. I'm getting older, so I'm getting slower now, but I could wake up, go for a run, not need a power gel or anything, come back, have breakfast, and it was good. And it was just freeing. I didn't feel like I needed to, have a bar in my pocket at all times. And that's kind of how I rolled. You'd be hoarding bagels and muffins at all the medical conferences. And, I think back at, you'd be at the hotel lobby if you're traveling and you didn't, because you're always hungry all the time. You'd be at that Holiday Inn Express buffet, taking extra muffins. And yeah, so I'm happier now because I don't need to do that. And, I'm running well too, at age fit. I haven't had an injury in 20 years. And I think nutrition has something to do with that too.
Without question, Mark. And so, one thing I wanted to dive just a little bit more into. So some of the swaps you're talking about, the practical things in terms of the food choices, we're talking about replacing simple carbohydrates and sugary carbohydrates from cereal with protein, with eggs, and you're talking also about not feeling as hungry, like, when we're riding this blood sugar roller coaster from all these simple carbohydrates, that can also impact our hunger. So I wanted to ask you, like, practically, making some of these choices, how much of it for you was figuring out where in my day I can swap out some of these simple carbs for things that are going to be more satisfying and more fulfilling, and how much of it are you really doing by the book, by the numbers, trying to say I'm going to eat X number of carbs a day? Is it more something you try to do mentally where you're making choices and trying to make the low carb choices?
Yeah, for me, I don't count anything, but my goal is just for health, and I've stabilized my blood sugar, so I've taken my blood sugar and my hemoglobin A1C. For those of you out there who know that, mine went from 6.3, now it's in the low 5, so that's in a normal range. And I wasn't trying to lose weight, my weight was stable. So I wanted to understand satiety. I'm full. That's actually an important signal to get. And so I just made the swaps out, and you eat slowly and more mindfully, and you just follow those cues. So probably calorie equivalents are pretty equal to how I eat. But now I don't need to wake up at 2 in the morning. I can have dinner, go to bed, wake up, go for a run if I need to without needing to refuel, and I don't need to snack through the day. If people have a specific goal, say they're 100 pounds overweight, or they're truly diabetic coming off medication. Some people are numbers people, and if they're tracking it, just like I don't know what a Fitbit is, or I don't count any. I'm not on Strava or any of this Garmin-y stuff. I'm too busy. I don't deal with that. But other people love that stuff, or they don't need that stuff. So I think it's helpful for people that need guidance. I had 2 patients today in my clinic who are type 1s doing low carbohydrate. And they brought in these spreadsheets, which are just impeccably detailed. But for them, that was really helping them kind of engineer what they're doing and reverse engineer if the sugar was high. So for them, 22 grams of carbs a day, they know down to the nickel what they're doing.
So I think for the purpose of this discussion, Mark, I'm sure there's a lot of folks who, like yourself, are active, they're training, and like you reach that point, they're looking to either improve their health or simply just feel better, So I think, that's a great perspective. And sort of for those folks who know that something is off because they're training and it's either a health marker or just the way they feel. Let's talk a little bit practically about how they could get started down this approach based on what you did. So one of the things you talked about just from an everyday nutrition standpoint was that swap of swapping out that cereal for eggs and having that better energy, that better feeling of satiety. Are there some other simple swaps you made to kind of what we would view as a typical runner meal that you were doing before to now what you might do on an everyday basis?
Yeah, I think the standard swap is, the carbo-loading meal. I think runners have been told they need to have, all this pasta and the carbo-loading breakfast. So, but your body has to be adapted. So you don't, go from eating all these carbs in the night before the Boston Marathon because you listen to a talk on low carbohydrate, because you have to teach your body metabolic flexibility. It takes, weeks, months, even years to really teach your body to access and use fat efficiently. So once you've made that switch, you're golden, and then you're good. You're in the sweet spot. If you've not made that switch yet, it's going to be a little more challenging, and you're going to have more difficulty with the harder workouts. Apologize, my kids are getting some snacks here. We're calling in from home. But yeah, so some people go in slow and teach their body slowly how to use fat as fuel. Other people, it takes a little bit longer to make that adaptation. So try things, and see how your body responds. If you're in the middle of a hard training block, you don't want to go all in and reduce all your carbohydrates. I think that might backfire a bit on you. So you might take a slower entry in if you're in that realm, if you're like in the middle of your summer training block for an early fall race.
And Mark, like when we're talking about the adaptation, this is something that in terms of manipulating your nutrition, becoming more efficient at burning fat, this is sort of a moving target in the sense that you can always work to be improving on this to a certain degree, right? So it doesn't always have to be, or I don't know, do you view it as being an all or nothing approach, or is this something that people can have success with saying, hey, I gradually want to try to lower my carbohydrate intake, I gradually want to lower my sugar intake. Maybe they start strategically doing it with a few meals or strategically doing it around their training. How would you respond to that for, kind of all at once approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think as humans, we adapt to our environments, and probably we're not, unless you have a medical condition, you're going to have times in the year, go back, millennia, there are probably times in the year for a human when you'd had more or less carbohydrates. So I wouldn't be switching day to day. That's probably just going to really wreak havoc with what your body's going to figure out. But you may, okay, this is say your summer training block is easier training. You're just trying to recover from spring events, build your aerobic capacity, build your fat burning capacity, and your A race might be the New York Marathon in November. The summer would be a perfect time to teach your body how to use fat as fuel. You're not doing hard workouts. Spend 3 months, lower your carbohydrates, slow down your training, do more aerobic based training, build those mitochondria, build those fat adaptive enzymes. And then when it's time to kind of add the gas later, you've got this huge foundation that you can always tap back into. But I think everyone needs to build that at some point. It's just like aerobic conditioning. If you've built a big aerobic base through like a lifetime of being an active kid, like a lot of us were back in the day, we had this huge aerobic base of playing tag all day before we, joined the cross country team in high school, and we tended to do pretty well. So I think you do need to invest at least 3 to 6 months to allow your body to make that adaptation and see how that feels and be like, wow, this feels really good. And then you may have a time where you're going to carb up a bit more if you're doing more intense training. Body is always looking for, different paths, and just like training, add variability. And again, this is for a healthy athlete. For someone who's diabetic, I don't think you can't go back here. This is the way you are. This is your lifestyle, because you have a medical condition that you're really trying to keep in check.
From your perspective, being in this sport, where did the whole notion of runners feeling like they needed carbohydrates and that was sort of the dominant fuel source they needed to rely on and supplement with, like where did that all come from?
Yeah, I mean, I think Dr. Noakes, if you go back into, like the original lore of running, and Dr. Noakes, Tim Noakes in South Africa has torn out the chapter. But I think a lot of it, just like everything, was industry driven. I mean, we had, all the Gatorade companies and the nutrition companies and the sports nutritionists, so the thought leaders. So in every industry, and in healthcare, we have thought leaders, the leaders in certain fields. So I think this is probably how it happened, but again, everyone probably has a hypothesis, before this, wow, this is what everyone needs to do. And this is true today. So if you look at the best athletes in the world in their 20s, like took the starting line of the Olympic marathon, and they're all 20 to 25, for example. Most of those elite athletes are going to eat sugar and burn sugar for the shorter distance events. And they're lean and they're healthy and they could kick your and my butt. And then the hypothesis is, well, the Kenyans eat 600 grams of carbs a day. Therefore, that must be the best diet for an athlete. But last time I checked, most people at the starting line of your average race, isn't running 100 miles a week, is different. So we can't base what is best for humanity on what the best in the world do. And that's, so gosh, that's just the way it is. Meb has shifted. He's 40, but when he was 20, he was probably burning sugar and still doing fine. But ultimately, his body started to change as he got older, and he realized, okay, something's got to change if I'm going to maintain. You can have a couple good seasons, but there's maintaining performance over 20 years of a career like Meb did, and then there's having a couple good years.
I think the one point you made that's so spot on and well taken is, especially when a lot of these recommendations are made based on what people at high-end performance are doing. I mean, their paycheck is driven by fractions of the seconds that they can shave off. But like you said, most of us are in it because we want to be healthy and we want to be able to be doing this for years and years and years.
For us, for elite athletes, training is training and everything else is recovery. For us, our day is training, and running is recovery. I get up at 5 in the morning with my dog and, put on a podcast, and that makes my day. That's recovery. So I don't want to beat myself up by doing that. The oxidative properties of fat metabolism, this is just something, you can go into the biochemistry of it, but a good analogy, Varun, is that, say I have a Dodge Charger and a Nissan Leaf. They're both going to go from point A to point B. One produces a lot of exhaust and the other has no exhaust. So fat metabolism in the mitochondria is much less oxidative. There's much less reactive oxidative species, much less inflammation and exhaust. So that what I hear from most people who make this switch isn't necessarily they're running faster. Kind of what they notice is that they don't notice any of that usual, gosh, I'm stiff, I'm sore, I don't feel like running today. It's like, I need a recovery day. When you make this switch, it's crazy because every day is a recovery day, but you're actually getting better. So that's, I just tell people to, stick to it, for 2 or 3 months and see what they notice. And maybe this little niggle goes away, this fasciosis goes away. Things just go away. It's crazy, but people just need to try it. They heal better.
Now, Mark, you made this point a few times, and for folks that kind of are in tune with this, it may seem fairly obvious, but I think it's worth having you explain. So this idea of lowering your sugar, intake and not being so carbohydrate dependent, you've tied it a few times in a few different ways to being better at burning fat. Why do those two things go hand in hand for folks that may not understand the relationship between sugar consumption, overconsumption of carbohydrate, and the inability to burn fat?
Yeah, so sugar just is a biochem 101 or insulin 101. So when we eat sugar, our pancreas produces insulin, and insulin's a storage hormone. And insulin, if you're healthy, insulin's going to store the sugar in our muscles and our liver. If we're not healthy, we can't really use that sugar in our muscles. We're insulin resistant, then it stores it in our belly. But when insulin is up, when insulin is high, insulin blocks lipolysis. So insulin in a technical term is anti-catabolic, meaning I can't burn fat if insulin is up. So if you're eating sugar all day, even if you're not gaining or losing weight, you're not burning fat. If you eat sugar, you burn sugar, insulin's up, insulin blocks fat metabolism. So if you want to tap into your body fat as fuel, insulin levels have to be low. That's why, like, the worst thing someone can do before a race, like before a marathon especially, which you got to burn fat early in the race because your heart rate's down, that's when you're chilling, is they'll have a bunch of simple carbs like 30 minutes before the race, jack up their insulin, and they start running and they wonder why, like, they're just not feeling well at like mile 15 or 16, because even though they were running slow in the beginning, they blocked their ability to burn fat. I'll wake up for this comrades run, which is 5:30 in the morning. It's 60 miles. I mean, I'll be up in some town, but I certainly won't be eating carbohydrates. I'll probably drink a shake of UCAN with some protein. Maybe I'll have, if I've got access to a hard-boiled egg or something, I'll eat that, and I'll show up at the line. I want to be burning fat early in that race, in the middle of that race, and probably the whole race. It's an all-day race. Maybe at the end, any of y'all that do ultras, there's some magic in like a defizzed Coke. When you're like smelling the bar and you're just like, at that point, you just need some sugar. This is these ultra races where you're, 8, 9, 10 hours, so that's a strategy. You save that for the end, and it's like rocket fuel.
Yeah, I think that's the big difference, to what you just pointed out, where you're talking about the strategic use of sugar to really ignite you, at a certain point versus
every other tank is empty. Here's the last
foundation of what you're doing, every 20 or 30 minutes throughout, which is what we've seen so often. But let me ask you this, Mark, were you skeptical? I mean, you put this into practice now and it's worked well for you, and certainly you've done lots of work in the field, and you've got a great grasp on the science because of what you do on a day-to-day basis as well. But from a running and training standpoint, was there a time where you felt like, no, I just need carbs to be able to go long, whether it's marathon, whether it's beyond, I need to rely on carbs?
Yeah, I mean, I probably was skeptical like everyone else, but I believe in science, and I have people that I know have done their homework. They've published hundreds of papers. So when I did read Finney and Volek's Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance, and I think that was published maybe about 6 years ago, I was like, yeah, this makes complete sense. At least for me and the way my body's metabolism, my family history, genetics, this makes complete sense. And then when I heard Tim Noakes start talking about it, and he's the preeminent sports scientist, when he and I gave a talk in 2013, we hosted a sports med conference together in Cape Town, South Africa. And I didn't know he was into this low carb stuff then. And, he was giving a talk on nutrition, and I'm listening to him talk, and I'm like, wow, I felt validated, because he said this. He said before he kind of came out, to talk about this, because he knew he'd be shot down by the scientific establishment. He spent about 5 years reading everything, and no one will ever outread Tim Noakes. And when Tim Noakes said, I think this is true, based on 5 years of reading, I'm like, well, okay, I'm pretty good with that, because he's the guy who really, 10 years before hyponatremia was on the radar of race directors, he was waving the red flag at conferences, and getting voted out of conferences, not invited to conferences, but he stuck to his guns, and now, there's a revolution in South Africa, not just for the runners, but for, the humanity. They're having, diabetes and obesity crisis there in the most impoverished places of South Africa.
No question. And yeah, like you said, he's been the thought leader at the forefront of that, both from a dietary standpoint and for runners as well, all over the world. Mark, just a couple more for you before we wrap this up. So, you aren't a guy who's secretive about this, right? You're going out there, you're sharing your experience with people, you're sharing this knowledge in the running community, and you've been doing this for the last several years now. So what type of skepticism are you still getting when people are pushing back, when people are saying, it sounds good, but can I really do this? Like, where does the skepticism generally come from?
Yeah, I mean, I just suggest, I'm not a zealot or, saying everyone needs to do this. If someone's, hit a wall or a plateau, a plateau should be, a high, stable place. So sometimes a plateau is good, right? That's high ground, that's flat. But if you say, well, if your plateau is low ground and you're just, things aren't working for you, try it, but do it right. So if people don't do it right, they buy paleo junk food or, things that just are not, they don't understand it. They're still getting tons of carbohydrates. They're still hyperinsulinemic medically if they're not getting themselves sorted out. It's not that the plan doesn't work. It hasn't been tailored for them. So people need good advice from people that can make it individual for each individual's goals. What's your goal? But if people are not meeting their goals, or they just want to see how they do, they need to do it right. But give it an honest try. You can't do it for 2 days. It takes, fat adaptation, as Steve Phinney and Jeff Willett call it, minimum would be like 4 weeks. So if you see a 3-week study, throw it out. I mean, for those of us, and those probably listening to this, this is their passion, is running endurance. This is not a 3-week part of their life. This makes them happy. And the thought, if I told a runner, look, you just can't run anymore, it's gone from your life. And no, I mean, there's probably isn't a bigger loss for someone other than a family member. I mean, because for people that run, it's saves their life. It's their brain fuel. So if it's not working for them and it's not giving them that happiness that they once had, they need to sort it out. And
the
try.
final place I want to end with you, Mark, is so we alluded a little bit to the training nutrition, and you were talking about the traditional strategies, of loading up with a bunch of simple carbs, whether it's from a bagel, whether it's an energy gel, kind of the traditional higher glycemic sports nutrition products. That's not going to set you up for that steady, consistent energy and that ability to burn fat. Now UCAN, which is something very unique, it's delivering energy in a different manner, much more slow releasing with our super starch instead of that quick surge. I'm just curious for you, how did UCAN come on your radar? How did you hear about it? And I guess, why were you intrigued by it?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know where I first saw, maybe it was an article just explaining the insulin response. And I understood that. I understood that to race, you want, fat burns in the fuel of carbohydrate, but you want a trickle. You want it stable release. And I saw the graph of the insulin response, and it made sense. And then I tried the product, and then I spoke even to a couple type 1 diabetics who have continuous glucose monitors, because that really, they can eat the UCAN bars. I should show you what's in my bag here on the way to South Africa.
Absolutely.
So the electrolytes actually, I think, are the magic, the secret sauce. Is so the calories and the carbs, you're going to kind of play with that based on your needs, but the electrolytes, the hydrate, the small packets of non-caloric sodium, potassium, magnesium. So if you're out there for a long period of time, 3, 4, 5 hours, even 2 hours, and you're just drinking free water, you're going to get into trouble. All the sports drinks are low in sodium and high in sugar. If you have a second, I think it's right here.
Why not? Let's keep this authentic, show and tell. That's what we got the video for.
Here's what I'm bringing to show you what you would use for a 60-mile race. So this is for me and one friend. So I don't know how many of these little straws I got in here.
See about 10 or 12 in there.
Easily, I think about 20, because I'm not going to drink any free water. Anytime I'm going to drink water, I'll probably carry 10, and my friend will carry 10. It's going to be probably 75 degrees, so not super hot. So we're lucky. If it was hotter, I'd probably take more. And then, I got all this standard, here's my camera, I got the protein, and, so this will be breakfast, and I'll probably stuff a couple of these in I've got a little belt, so, mix that up somewhere along the way, but just to have that. But the little packets are just so easy to carry. You could just overhydrate with free water really easily. And people should try that, like on the summertime. If you just, you're going to go out on a long Sunday run and it's warm, you can super hydrate yourself with the electrolytes. You can kind of super saturate the cells a little bit, so it's kind of like, putting on an extra backpack of fluid before you go out the door. And then you just carry those little straws with you. If you have a water source out on your run and you carry a little bottle, don't just fill it with the water, just tear off one of those little straws, but just try it. I think that's been the most enlightening thing to me, is just seeing what electrolytes do, in the presence of a low carbohydrate plan.
Yeah, I was going to say, exactly, as reading some of the literature that you've been alluding to with Jeff Bullock and Steve Phinney, I think that's certainly one of the things they talk a lot about, where when you are on a lower carbohydrate diet, really making sure you get those adequate electrolytes. And I'm sure, as you mentioned, even more important when you're active and training. And Mark, I just wanted to point just to one difference. So kind of the two different products you were talking about, the square packets that Mark was pointing out, that's the superstart. So that's the slow release carbohydrates. That's what Mark kind of will be feeding with at intervals, maybe every 2 hours or so. And that's giving you that slow and steady
Yeah, I'm gonna
trickle.
carry some bars too. I have a case of bars, you know, because
Big
they'll
bars as well. Exactly. So those are taking care of your carbohydrate needs. But again, we're not talking about the traditional rapid dump of carbohydrate. It's that slow trickle that UCAN provides. And then the hydration is a way to get the electrolytes without all the sugar in between that you mentioned. So that's a great look at your plan, Mark. And I know kind of outside of the UCAN, you'll supplement, with other things more for satiety, right? Like things like trail butter and things of that
see
nature.
what's out there. You know, when you go out on these things, you know, you just kind of see what's out there, and you go by, you know, since they've got these salted potatoes that they've had on this course for, I think it's the race is almost 100 years old, and there are these boiled salted potatoes, you know, so probably at some point into the race, that's, you know, and they've been boiled up the day before, so that's actually a slower release starch if a potato's been boiled up and kind of let sit. So those things act with the salt. So there's history to the electrolytes. People just knew they needed it. Hydration is electrolytes, not water. It's electrolytes and water. So I think a lot of people don't understand that. Even in the hospital, they don't understand that. When someone's dehydrated, they will give them water or they'll give them juice, which doesn't hydrate them. You need electrolytes, you know, for treatment and prevention of the low fluid states, dehydration.
Mark, there's a ton of great info here.
I'll let you know how it goes. Talk to me.
How it goes, and to just kind of put a bow on this and wrap things up. If people want to give this a try, you know, if they've heard what you have to say, they're compelled, they're hitting some of these issues you've talked about, whether it's with health markers or just hitting a plateau in their training that's lower than where they want that plateau to be. What are maybe 2 or 3 key things to consider in terms of the timing of when to get started? You know, I know you mentioned like the right block in your training, but any couple key things to take away in terms of how to get started or the timing of when to get started?
Yeah, I think like everything, you know, why observe what you're doing now, you know, so, you know, just do a lot. You just kind of see, maybe you have a training log, prepare, you know, if you're going to make a shift in how you eat, you've got to go shop. You got to get rid of junk food. Sugar is super addictive. I mean, it hits the same dopamine center. So if you just love all the baked goods and the cereals and the stuff's in your cabinet, good luck. It just won't work. You know, it stuff's right there. So you got to like have delicious low carbohydrate foods, you know, around. And then you just pick the time, you know, it can't be, you know, a time not to start a low carbohydrate diet. And I tell this to medical patients too. I mean, if something is super stressful going on in your life, you know, it's probably not the time to start something that might add at least another short-term stress. So if you're in the middle of like a training block or racing season, you know, because this is a process, you know, it's not an event, it's a process of shifting your metabolism, and it should be joyful, because if this is stressful, you're releasing cortisol, which is just going to sabotage you. So if you're on night shifts and you're not sleeping, you know, so if everything else is working against you and you're trying a low carbohydrate diet, stress, sleep, you know, can't exercise because you're traveling, that's not the time to do it. You know, and the time to do this is when you have a block of slow, easy training, you know, which is that fat burning zone. Phil Maffetone describes it well, you know, 180 minus your age, you know, that aerobic base building. So find that time in your schedule and dig in and give it a try. I mean, we all have a long life to live, and, you know, I learn something new every day. And if it doesn't work for you, then stop, right? You know, so just don't poo-poo it, you know, try it. You know, most people who are skeptical have never done it. They'll just read some article. It's like, well, have you tried this? Well, no, it's stupid. And they make an opinion. So, I mean, I've been on both sides of the road, you know, so I give my opinion a little bit, but I'll just give knowledge to people and let them try things. You know, my opinion doesn't mean anything. All that means something is how they feel.
No question. And, you know, it's really like, I think piggybacking off what you said, it's treating your body like a laboratory and seeing what works for you. As we know more and more, nutrition can be so individual. But for a lot of people that are running and are following the traditional runner's diet, this is certainly worth considering. So, Mark, I really want to thank you for sharing your info, for giving us some time before heading across the globe to run. So
reaction. Now I got to go pack. I have my food, so Just that my passport. The rest is details after that.
Well, safe travels. Have a great trip. Thanks so much for sharing this info with us. And Mark, for folks, you've written a lot about these topics in addition to these webinars. So for folks that want to read more about what you've written, what's the best way for them to find you?
Go to the Natural Running Center, naturalrunningcenter.com. I think, there's a number of it. There's a little section there called Dr. Mark's Desk. And just scroll down there. I've got different posts on fat burning and running marathons and fuel strategies for races. We did a webinar through UCAN. Maybe we could share that one. Kind of when we had some slides if people like slides and diagrams and things like that.
Definitely. So a lot more to come. Yeah, we'll send out some of those resources that Mark mentioned. And this today was indicated to just scratch the surface. But yeah, Dr. Mark, he's written a lot about this topic.
Book. Yeah, I mean, the Bible is there. It's a great book.
Absolutely. That's
products, yeah, it's a great thing to travel with, great thing to take before runs, during runs, and if you see how you feel. But yeah, it's part of the process. It's a nice supplement but the dietary change is the key. It complements the dietary change.
Absolutely. And those books, Mark, I'll leave us with this: the Art and Science of Low Carb Living and the Art and Science of Low Carb Performance, the two books that Mark's alluding to. So thanks, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining us for the session. Hopefully you learned a lot. Mark's got a lot of great info. Thanks, Mark. Safe travels, and we'll talk to you next time.
Awesome.